Biblical Greek or Koine Greek has two past tenses, and they are the imperfect and the aorist. The imperfect, as you might have guessed, represents imperfective action. By imperfective, we just mean it's continuous action, or it's represented as being unfolding. It's action that's incompleted from the point of view of the author. Whereas the aorist represents perfective action, that is undefined or summarized action, action that's viewed as having been completed. The imperfect verb represents action that's incomplete, or sometimes they choose an imperfect verb because something else is happening during the action, and the imperfect kind of sets the stage, as we'll see in more detail in just a moment. The aorist is simply indicating that the action happened. So let's see a couple of examples. An example of an aorist translated into English would be, she went to the meeting. It's a simple sentence, and all we're saying is that this event happened. Whereas the imperfect would be with that ing type of action, and it would be translated, she was going to the youth meeting. Now you could just say this and it could stand alone as a sentence, but often the imperfect will be setting the stage for something else that happened. For instance, we could say she was going to the youth meeting when she bumped into an old friend. And from there we might expect to see more information about what happened when she bumped into her old friend. The difference between these two past tenses is one of aspect. Aspect has to do with the kind of action. So the aorist is perfective action, whereas the imperfect is imperfective or unfolding action. Both of these tenses are past tense, but there's a difference in their aspect. The imperfect tense represents an incomplete or non-perfected action from the author's perspective, and the context will provide more details. In English, we generally provide was along with the ing form of the verb. So let's take a look at how the imperfect verb forms. It's going to have an augment and a stem and a connecting vowel as well as a secondary ending. Now we've met the primary endings, but the past tenses are going to take what's called secondary endings. The augment's generally going to be an epsilon. The stem, let's say we're working with the verb Lego. The stem of Lego is leg. The stem is the part of the verb that carries the basic meaning. And then these verbs are going to have a connecting vowel, which was added for pronunciation, and then a secondary ending. Elegon would mean I was speaking. The augment and secondary endings are always used with the past tenses and will always appear together. This is an important point to make because there might be some forms where the augment is not clear. And if you look at the ending and you see that it's a secondary ending, then you know that it must be augmented as well, and then you can translate it as a past tense verb. The augment and the secondary ending, again, will always go together. So what does augmentation look like? Well, if we have a verb that begins with a consonant like Lego, it's going to be augmented with an epsilon. That augment tells us it's past action, and we would translate this, I was speaking. If a verb begins with a vowel, that vowel can lengthen, and again it will take secondary endings. If it's a verb like akuo, then this would be translated, I was hearing. There are some verbs that begin with a diphthong, and so sometimes that initial vowel will lengthen, other times it won't. A verb like eurisko would be translated, I was finding. And then sometimes we'll be dealing with a compound verb. That's a verb that has a preposition. So in the example of peripateo, we see the preposition peri, and then we have pateo. And notice that here we have peri again, that the augment comes right after the preposition, and then the verb continues. So this is key and it takes some getting used to, but for compound verbs, the augment comes after the prefix or after the preposition, and peripatun would be translated, I was walking. So these rules of augmentation, they're not that hard, but they also take some getting used to, and every once in a while, we'll come across forms that are difficult to recognize. And so if you remember what I was saying, that the augment and secondary endings with the past tenses will always appear together, that will help you. So for instance, ekuon, we look at the secondary ending, And then we can remember, oh, okay, I think this is from a kuo, it's just that the vowel lengthened. And then we'll be able to translate it correctly. Same goes for a strange form like this. Look at the ending. That's the secondary ending, so now you know it's got an augment. And that will be helpful for translation. So let's look at all of the forms in the active voice for the imperfect verb. Elegon is first person singular, and it would mean I was speaking. Eleges is second person singular, and it means you were speaking. Let's take a close look at these endings too, and we'll try to commit them to memory. Elegen means he, she, or it was speaking. Elegomen means we were speaking. Elegete means you were speaking, or you all were speaking. And elegon means they were speaking. The endings that are the same as the primary endings that we've already seen are the sigma, the men, and the te. The other three are new endings, and we should commit them to memory. Let's take a look at the middle passive forms. First person singular in middle passive voice, if we use the verb pisteuo, which means I believe, would be epistephomin, and it means I was believed. And then we have epistevou, and that means you were believed. Epistevito means he, she, or it was believed. Epistevomytha means we were believed. Episteveste means you were believed. And finally, epistevonto means they were believed. We've already seen these two endings, the metha and the ste, as primary middle passive endings. So that means for the secondary middle passive endings, we have 4 new ones to learn. The main, the sa, the ta, and the nta. When these endings are fixed to the ends of the verbs, they're pretty straightforward, easy to identify, but there is one that contracts, and that's the sigma omicron. It ends up being an omicron upsilon, and that's because the sigma drops out between 2 vowels, and when epsilon meets omicron, it contracts to an omicron upsilon, and we're left with the final form, epistevou. It really depends on the verb. I didn't put I was being believed here, okay? It really depends on the verb. Sometimes it will be clear that in the middle passive voice we want to include that ing sense of I was being believed. Other times it will sound very awkward in English. And so I want to keep in mind that the main thing is aspect. These have an imperfective aspect. And if we can include the ing and it doesn't sound awkward, that in English, that's the closest way we have to kind of capture the kind of action that's being described. So here's an overview of the primary tenses and the secondary tenses and their endings. Take a minute to study these forms, compare the primary endings to the secondary endings, and let's try to commit these to memory.